Now, I know what you're thinking, and you'd be correct. I do have a few of these jackets, which makes me, as the ladies say, a little boring. When I find something that just works, I'm immediately drawn to it, like a Reddit mod to a cosplayer. Take Edna here. She is about 2 decades old, making her roughly twice the age of the average viewer of this stupid channel. Now, I might be constantly mistaken for a middle-aged hairdresser, but she is still the love of my life because of her reliability. So that is the theme for this build, reliability. But first, a quick disclaimer. This video contains some satire and parody, which some of you may take offense to. My only option as an irrelevant is to ride on the coattails of far more successful, more established creators. But it's just memes. So in fact, no one should watch this video. The subject of boring, this background is disgusting. We have to do something about this. And I think another tech tuber may have the answer.
To actually bake lighting into the room itself, baked into all the lights kind of baked into it.
Luminescent confectionery aside, here's my plan for the ultimate reliable build. First, we need to scavenge what I can from my old trainwreck Lian Li build. Links up here in the description if you want to find out more about that. I need to spend minimal money. We need to get rid of RGB altogether. It has to be quiet. I am making no compromises on cooling, but most importantly, downsize to a smaller build. But how much do you downsize to? My other build is an SFF ITX build, and while I absolutely loved building in it, shrinking everything to SFF comes at an added cost, which we call the SFF tax. SFF builds are simultaneously the most rewarding and unforgiving to build in, and this is going to be my main rig. I wanted to get optimum airflow and performance, and a bit of ease to build and chop and change parts as I please. MFF, or micro form factor, was the natural choice here. MFF is this awkward middle child that's not small enough to be loved by the SFF elite, but also not big enough to roll with the big boy ATX mid-full tower crew. I personally think it deserves way more love. You can find some really good deals on MATX boards, and if you have limited desk space or want a build that you can like move between rooms for something like VR, MFF makes a compelling case. Enough of terrible puns, let's go through the build, mistakes, problems and all, which will hopefully help you if you're planning a similar build, and you'll save yourself the headache. To reuse my 14600K, I needed a Z790 board. The thing is, pickings for Z790 MATX boards seem to be quite slim. I wasn't a huge fan of the aesthetic of the silver accented one from ASUS, so I was kind of cornered into getting the ROG Z790 ITX and having to pay the SFF tax anyway. There goes the part about saving money. But damn, this is a beautiful board considering it supports 2 NVMEs, which I needed, with the little built-in fans to keep them cool, and another little fan for the VRMs. But before we commence to fillet the long shaft of ASUS, there is one major flaw with this board, and 2 silly quirks, which we will soon discover. I'm just going to reuse my RAM, which is a pair of DDR5 dominated titaniums, so I guess there goes the part about RGB. Kinda. But it is seeming like this plan was a little flawed from the beginning. Now, if you want to go quiet, it is difficult to beat a really good AIO. And when it comes to performance, you cannot beat the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. It wipes the floor with every other AIO at a fraction of the price. My last 4 builds that I've done for friends has had some variation of the LF3. 240mm would work in my chassis of choice, but I preferred the quietness of a 360. The other issue with the LF3 is that it is a little bit of a chungus, and with my RAM already competing with the likes of the Burj Khalifa, getting it into an MFF case is going to be a bit of a fight. Until I stumbled upon Corsair's new Nautilus RS360. Bro, where are the reviews for this thing? It is ticking a lot of the boxes for me right now. No RGB, listed as being one of the quietest AIOs at just 20 decibels. It's not badly priced either. Not sure why no one's talking about it. I guess we're going to have to be the guinea pigs for this one. When it comes to cooling, I have a lot of past experience with Noctua, so I could have thrown a bunch of NF12s in and genuinely just never thought about it. There is one fan though that has been on my mind, and it's one of the best performing fans on the market. None other than the PHANTEKS T30s. I don't know, I just love the look of the T30s, and in many tests, it is one of, if not the best 120mm fan. It accomplishes this by kinda cheating.
Naughty, naughty.
While your average fan has a girth of a measly 25mm, the T30s, as the name suggests, increase this to 30mm. These fans in advanced mode, which can be enabled with this little PWM profile switch, can push the fans up to 3000 RPM. But it's working out to be a little too loud for me. Their liquid crystal polymer construction on both the blades and the frame make these extremely strong and rigid, and their forward swept fan blades make them excellent use against like a radiator or close to a dust filter. Their built-in rubber corners also mean vibration and noise are kept to a minimum. I really could go on and on about these fans, but they don't come in cheap. Each of these fans, brand new, will set you back roughly 30 British quids or 37 freedom shekels, which is a lot. Luckily, I found a 9-pack of these used on Facebook Marketplace for just under a tenner each. But, and there is a big but here, without any screws. The problem is the added 5mm to the fans means standard radiator screws are just not long enough to make their way through the fan into the rad. If you purchase these new, they come with 36mm and 39mm screws, so you can attach them to your rad. I found the original screws impossible to buy, so I tried my luck at some Alpha Cool Nexos 35mm and 37mm screws. Unfortunately, these didn't work. With the Nautilus anyway. After trying to install them in the wrong orientation the first time.
What an idiot!
The Alpha Cool screws would kind of, but not completely bite on the radiator holes. Some of them kind of worked, but most of them just didn't catch. So this was an epic fail. After failing to find the standard screws online, I ended up having to buy a 3-pack of new T30s anyway. The other issue with buying used is that I noticed a sticky, sweet smelling residue on the fans. I asked the seller if he vaped, but he was adamant that he didn't. So I'm kinda unsure as to what that was, but I'd maybe prefer not to know. So if you are buying used parts, make sure to ask the seller if they do vape or smoke to avoid having your used components smell like the leavings of a colorful Pixar character. Powering all this malarkey is the SF1000 80+ Platinum from Corsair. Apart from finding a fantastic deal on Amazon, it is one of, if not the best SFF power supplies you can buy. It dethroned its older brother, the OG SF750, which was the go-to for so many SFF builds for the last 5 years. Power supplies are simultaneously the component that people seem to overspend on by getting a ridiculous 5 million megawatt unit, or buying a no-name brand from the antique store down the street. I mean, this is the thing that is connecting your PC to the sun or Saudi Arabia. So just check your PC requirements to check that you don't buy something unnecessarily OP, and fight the urge to save a quick buck. But why the fancy SFX PSU, you may ask? My reasons for choosing these are twofold. Firstly, it gives me the flexibility to move to SFF if I wanted to, but mainly because of its size. Just look at it in comparison to this regular size PSU, which has less than half of its capacity. It's tiny.
That's what she said!
While I think most, if not all, MFF chassis support full-size ATX PSUs, it does come with a little bit of a compromise. Adding a full-size PSU to your chassis means a little less space for that 360 rad up top, and does kind of make cable management a little tedious. My plan also involved maximum airflow, so a full-size PSU meant getting in the way of a front fan of the chassis. Speaking of which, there aren't nearly as many MFF chassis relative to the ATX ones, but my choice came down to one of three. We have the AP201 from Asus, the Lian Li A3M ATX, or the
Jonsbo? It's like the least cool name for the coolest PC case ever.
Anyway, the Jonsbo D31. I've already had some experience building in the AP201 and the D31 previously. The AP201 is definitely the better build of the two, no doubt, but the prime branding down the side gave me some Logal Paul vibes, and I wasn't partial to the band which runs across the top. The A3, in my opinion, is probably the best looking of the bunch, but it falls a little short in the cable management department. It also lacks the capability to add a front mount fan, and it would have been a little bit of a squeeze getting the T30s and a 4090 FE in the bottom. I mean, it is doable, but the fans would be right up against the GPU. You don't ever want fans butting up against each other or the GPU, as it can have the opposite desired effect by reducing their cooling efficiency. So the D31 it is. I had built in the mesh front variant previously, but decided on the SKU that comes with a built-in display. I personally like keeping an eye on telemetry and temp, so I thought this would be a fantastic place to view that. There's adequate space to mount 3 120mm fans on the bottom and another one on the front, which means you get fantastic amount of airflow. So let's get to building. This is not by any means going to be an exhaustive build video. I mean, there are channels that will cover this, the most aesthetic of which, in my opinion, is Mr. Matt Lee. So definitely guys, go and check him out. But if there's one takeaway from this build, is that you should always just do a test boot with your components before putting it into the chassis. it makes troubleshooting a whole lot easier. The fun thing about this case is that the built-in display made for a great test boot system, which was quite cool. Now comes the part about the problems, and problems of which there are many. Chief of which is my NVMe's shape. ASUS, what is with this NVMe slot design? It honestly hurts me just to look at. There are politicians who are less crooked and bent. Looking through the internets, it seemed like the bottom thermal pads are a little too thick, causing the drive to bend. Another wriggly wiggly I have is that this FPS2 daughter board, which has the front panel and I/O connectors, looks to have 2 USB headers. But I just could not get this one port to work. There's just a single thread I found online, where lots of people have had issues with this. And it seems to be like the second header is sort of a half USB port. I don't know, like a UA port. This is also a problem on the X670 from my understanding. So it looks like you're stuck using USB splitters if you need more than one port. The last silly things is that the board has no front panel audio or audio ports on the back. Audio ports are only available via the included ASUS Hive. Not a major thing for me, but something that maybe you should be aware of. Now, if you are planning a similar build, cable lengths are short with the SFX PSUs, so you will need an EPS cable extension, which will need to be run before mounting your RAD. Now the main issue I had is that the motherboard just had a single chassis PWM header, meaning I could only set a single fan curve for all the fans that were connected to it. I didn't want that. I wanted separate fan curves for the front, bottom and rear fans. I also didn't want to have to buy a proprietary controller or maybe have to use something like Armory Crate, which seems to be heavier than Jupiter. After searching and searching, I thought I was kind of fresh out of luck until I stumbled upon this, the Open Fan Controller by Karanovich Research. Now listen, this thing is nothing short of genius. I could be wrong, but I genuinely think it's the only thing on the market like it. Just think of it as adding 10 more individually controllable PWM headers to your setup. It simply connects via USB header to its little USB-C port. The hardware and software is completely open source, but most importantly, it works with fan control, which is an exceptionally powerful, free, lightweight software for controlling fans and their fan curves. There's no way I can do justice to this modern-day marvel of engineering, so I'm just going to create a separate video on it. But do check out Sasha Karanovich. Dude, I'm sorry if I've butchered your name, G. So check him out on YouTube and GitHub. I'll leave links to all of these down in the description. The little gotchas I have is that I struggled a little to 3D print an enclosure for this thing. There is a file available made by another contributor, but I just really struggled. This could be just because I'm a blithering buffoon that knows nothing about 3D printing. So I whipped out some cardboard, a spudger, and some zip ties to make a temporary backplate until I figured out how to get a proper case made. This is definitely one of those do as I say, not as I do moments. But for now, it stops the board from shorting against the cage, which is okay for now. The other thing to bear in mind is that this thing is not cheap. But remember, it's not mass produced and it's made by a small, mind you, highly skilled creator. So I think once its adoption picks up, I'm sure we can get them manufactured at a much lower cost. But other than that, I freaking love this thing. I have so many ideas for it, but again, I think it just deserves its own video. But enough blabbering. Let's have a look then at the finished build.
Coffee and computers. Two industries that are opaquely similar, but yet so indestructibly different. I have spent the better part of my life basking in the flatulence of my daily forenoon Java, an injection of which I am vehemently addicted. If the beans are the central processing unit, what is the grinder? The graphical processing unit? Turning the ever-flowing electrons into frames? Before adorning the traced rays into deep learning super samples. As you perch upon the gaming chair, genuflecting, masticating, the warm chocolatey liquid slithering southward down your gullet, diametrically opposed to frags rapidly turning your insides firm, and tumescent, and priapic.
Got me
So we arrive then at the verdict. The built-in screen, sadly, is a gimmick. I have a paid-for version of AIDA64, and I love the fact that I could just buy a pre-made sensor panel on Etsy for the screen, but it sadly is just more frustrating than it is useful. This is more of a Windows problem than it is an AIDA or Jonsbo problem. For example, when you start the computer, the sensor panel just goes to the wrong display and ends up being the wrong resolution and then gets cut off when you try to move it to the little display. According to AIDA64, this is down to Windows' quirky DPI scaling, which I don't think AIDA has any control over. But what about the cooling? The added fans on the bottom and the front seem to have made little, if any, difference to temps. Not even a single degree, even with the fans at full whack. There is a possibility here that I'm just being dumb and I don't know how to benchmark. Or this could just be a testament to how well the AIO with the T30s and the GPU cooler are able to work in this chassis. But I am a stickler for symmetry, so having matching fans on the top and bottom, to me, just looks amazing. I'm glad I got to save some money too on used and existing parts. Well, except the AIO and the T30s, which I needed the fan screws for, and the fan controller, and the PSU. But there is a lot to love about this build. It's both cool in terms of aesthetic and temperature. It lacks the burdensome RGB software, making it just feel swift and responsive. The form factor means I get a little more legroom under my desk, and I'm not bothered about moving it into the lounge when I want to play some VR. This is pretty much everything I could ask for in a build. But the real star for me is OpenFan. Projects like this are just what makes me love the tech community. So my next video is going to be a more in-depth deep dive look into this bad boy. My heart goes out to you.